Hello, everyone, my followers, my friends, and all of those who are willing to learn some chess today. My name is Adrian Winter Atwell, and today I bring a new video for you. This time, we are going to be talking about basic chess, those things that we have to learn before we could even start playing the game. So let's take a look at what I bring for you and let's learn some new things. However, I will be starting from the very beginning. So from the name of the pieces, the squares, all of those basic things that you need to know before you even sit in front of a chessboard to make one move. So let's get started right ahead. To begin with, I will like to talk about the chessboard. So here in front of you, you have a chessboard. The chessboard has 64 squares, okay? And it has other things in it. So let me start talking about some of the basic. Number one, you should always have a white square by your right hand. So when you sit to play the game, make sure you rotate the board until you have a white square by your right hand. If you do not have a white square by your right hand, make sure you rotate the board. Again, I repeat, and you have a white square there. If you don't, then you are not going to be playing chess. You will be playing something else. Okay. So that is the basic thing that you need to know. The second thing that I have to show you is that on the chessboard, we have files, we have ranks, we have diagonals, and we also have squares. And we're only talking about the chessboard. But don't worry, these all are just easy. So when it comes to files, we call files the squares that go up and down. So when you look at squares going up and down, if you pay attention to them like this way, then we're talking about files, okay? And the files, they normally go according to the letter. So I say this one over here will be the A file, this one will be the B file, this one will be the C file, this one will be the D file, E file, F file, G file, and H file. So in that way, we learn files. Then we also talk about ranks. So on the ranks, we have the squares that go across like this, okay? And to name them, we just say first rank, second rank, third rank, fourth rank, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth rank. So that is how we name the ranks. Besides that, we have diagonals. I'm not going to be naming diagonals now, but yes, we have diagonals, and the diagonals are the squares that go slanted like this. So all those squares slanted like that are called diagonals. Okay, so these are the diagonals. All right, all those squares slanted diagonals. Pay attention to this part because I may be, I will be teaching you about pieces that move in ranks on files and also along diagonals. So pay attention to that part. Then after this, we also have squares. Okay, so squares is each one of these boxes. We call them squares. So do not call them boxes. Okay, so they are called squares. And actually, the squares, each one of them have a name. Yes, the squares have names. Okay, so they have a name and they go according to the letter and the number. So let's start learning about that one time. So on the squares, we have this square, for example, letter A, number one. The square is called A1. Okay. And we also always call the letter first. So what we want to do, we want to call the letter first. So I'll go A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, A7, A8. And those are the names of the squares. Okay. So always pay attention to the names of the squares. Then we have we could name randomly. For example, if I look at this square, I look letter F, number 6. So the name of the square is F6. If I look at this square over here, letter E, number 4. So the name of the square is E4. If I go over here, letter B, number 7, the name of the square is b7, and so on. So with that, we get the name of the squares and we get to know the basic part of the chessboard. Now, we just have to go forward with the name of the pieces, how to set the chessboard, and then how do the pieces move and how do they capture? Well, that will be next. So stay tuned. I'll be right back. Hello everyone. Well, I'm back and I brought some pieces for you and I have set up the board for you as well. So let's go through this process and see how this works. But let's start first with naming the chess pieces. So let's go with the name of the pieces. So I will start with this one. This one is called a rook. So I'll go rook, knight, bishop, king, queen, and pawns. Okay, so these ones are called pawns. I will repeat. So we go rook, knight, bishop, king, queen, and pawns. Okay, so in this session will be very short. I just want to name the pieces and I want to show you how to set up the board. Well, right here they are set up and this is how you're supposed to set it up. But in general, if you are playing with someone, you may want to start with the rook. So imagine an empty board and you just grab a rook and you put the rooks on the corners. Okay, so you put the rooks. After the 2 rooks, you put the 2 knights. So it's rook, knight, and then you go with the bishops. So you put the 2 bishops. Okay, so this part is very, very simple. Then you will reach to the middle where you will have 2 empty squares. One of them is for the king and the other one is for the queen. Here is something to remember. The queen always go on her color. Always, okay? The queen always on her color. So if it is a white queen, goes on white. If it is a black queen, goes on black. Okay, so just remember that. Once you follow that rule, you will always set up the board properly. Of course, remember, you need to have a white square by your right hand. Don't forget that one. And then when you reach this part here, after putting rooks, knight, bishop, then you make sure you put the queen on her color. So if it's a white queen, on white. If it's a black queen, you put it on black, okay? And in front of those pieces, you will just be placing the pawns, okay? So you put the pawns in front of the pieces. And this is generally how you just set up the board. So this is to set up the board. Make sure you put rooks, knights, bishop, king, and queen, the pawns right in front, and just practice. Make sure and practice the name of the pieces. You don't want to be calling a rook a tower or a castle, all right? It's not a tower, it's not a castle, it's a rook, okay? For the knight, remember it's a knight, not a donkey, not a horse, okay? So yes, that is all for this part, and I will be coming just now with the fun part of finally learning how to move these pieces so we could start playing a chess game. Okay, so we are back and now we're going to be starting learning about the rooks. Okay, rooks. One of my favorite pieces. They are very quiet pieces, but yeah, they are cool. So the rooks, okay, the value first. The value of a rook is 5 points. So a rook is worth 5 points. And the rook moves up, down, and sideways. So vertically and horizontally, okay? So on files and on ranks, that is how the rook moves. So let me just mark how it moves just so you could have an idea. So you see those arrows there? Yeah, that is how you will be moving your rooks. So it's very simple. The rook moves up, down, and sideways. Okay, that is how you move your rooks up, down, and sideways. The rooks have a value of 5 points each. This is something to remember because paying attention to the value of the pieces when you are trading pieces one for another, you want to make sure you have good trades and not bad trades. Now, continue with the rook. Okay, I will just move this rook around a little bit. So the rook will move like this. The black rook will move like this. And then I will move this one like that. So notice how the rook moves up, down, and sideways. Okay, so this is simply how the rook moves: up, down, and sideways. Now that I finish practicing a little bit or showing you how to move the rooks, let's go and see how the rooks capture. Okay, so how do they capture? So here I have a board now with some pawns, a rook and some pawns. Now notice, if I look at this rook, immediately the rook cannot capture anything. So there's nothing that the rook could capture. So that is something to remember sometimes in chess. If it's not in the line of the piece that you have, then you cannot capture it. You cannot just magically jump from here and capture this pawn. No, it doesn't work like that. So we have to try to attack one of those pieces before we capture those pawns. So what I will do, I will put this rook over here. And now my rook wants to capture this pawn. So I put my rook here, capture the pawn. Then I will put it right here in front of the pawn. And then I could go forward and capture the pawn. I will then move behind this one here. And then I will capture this pawn as well. So remember, the rook moves up, down, sideways, and it captures in the same way. Notice something very important, that when you are capturing the pieces, you actually take the place of where the pieces were. All right. So notice that is very, very important. You do not jump over the pieces. You just capture it like that. And of course, if you are playing in a normal chessboard, a real chessboard, not online, then you just take the piece out of the board and you occupy the square where the piece was with the rook in this case. Okay. So this is all about the rook. Things to remember about the rook: it moves up, down, sideways, and it is worth 5 points. Very simple. Okay. So now let's go to the next piece. So I'll be right back. Let's go to the next piece. Okay, now we have in front of us the bishops. Okay, and the bishops are very nice pieces. They are like long range pieces. They are called minor pieces. They have a value of 3 points. Okay, so they are minor pieces, like together with the knights. Bishops and knights are called minor pieces, and the bishop, each one of them, has a value of 3 points. Notice that the bishop has less value than the rook. So if you exchange a bishop for a rook, it's good for you if you are the one with the bishop. But if you have the rook and you exchange the rook for the bishop, that will not be such a bad, no, will not be such a good exchange. So yes, just giving you some heads up when you start to play the game. So okay, let's go to what we come here to do, which is learning how the bishop moves. So the bishop moves in diagonal. So I will just mark the way that the bishop moves. So this one will move in light squares, and that's something I'm going to be talking about. And the other one will move in dark squares. For example, when we set up the board, okay, we will have a bishop over here and a bishop over here. Notice that one of the bishop will be on a light square and the other bishop will be on a dark square. Now, the light square bishop will always only move in white squares, and the dark square bishop will always only move in dark squares. So let's move the bishops a little bit around the board. So the bishop can move here, this one could move like this. Notice that I could just follow diagonals. I don't have to go all the way in on the diagonal. I could always stop anytime you want. You could just stop your bishop, put it wherever you want, but you have to follow the rule of playing using diagonals. Notice that this bishop can never go to a dark square, to a light square, sorry, and this bishop can never go to a dark square. Of course, they only play in diagonals, all right? So they cannot move sideways or anything like that. And they will only follow the color square that they started on. Okay, so the bishop started on a dark square will always play on dark squares, and the other one will always play on light squares. Now, seeing about the bishop like that, let's see how the bishop captures. Okay, so here I have some pawns on the board, and we can illustrate here how the bishops capture by using our bishop to capture those pawns. Okay, so this will give you an idea. So this bishop, I'll start with the dark square bishop. If I look at the diagonal of this bishop, I could see that in his diagonal, there is a pawn on e7. So I could use this bishop to go to e7 and capture this pawn. And in the diagonal of this one, there is only one pawn as well, which is that one here. So this bishop can only capture this pawn. Now, at this moment, these bishops cannot take or capture the other pawns. They can't. In order to do that, you will have to line up your bishop with that pawn. That means in chess, attacking the pawn. So if I put this bishop here, now my bishop is attacking this pawn. Be careful when your pieces are on the attack, because they may be just about to be captured. And then I will use this bishop to attack this one. Okay. So then I could just capture this pawn. I could capture this pawn with the bishop. I could play now bishop here to attack the other pawn. And then I will just capture the pawn. Notice that here I am illustrating how the pieces move, and this will be totally different from gameplay. Although gameplay, the pieces will move like that, but the pawns, your opponent could always choose to defend the pawn or to move the pawn forward so you cannot capture it, because after you make a move, it is your opponent's turn to play. Just remember that that is how you play chess. You make one move, your opponent makes one move, okay? But in here, we're just practicing how the pieces move and how they capture. And this is how the bishop moves and how they capture. Things to remember about the bishop. Remember, the bishop is worth 3 points and plays in diagonals. Only in the color square that it starts. Dark square bishop will only play on dark squares. Light square bishop will only play on light squares. Okay, so just remember those rules about the bishop. Okay, now let's see what is the next piece that we have. Okay, we are back, and we are here with the queen, the lady of the game. So yes, the queen. The queen is worth 9 points, okay? Is worth 9 points, meaning the queen is more important and more valuable than the rook and than the bishop, okay? Something to remember, okay? More than the rook, more than the bishop. Now, the queen actually moves like a mixture of bishop and rook. So the queen could move up, down, and sideways, just like the rook, but the queen could also move in diagonals, just like the bishop. So this makes the queen the most dangerous piece on the chessboard and the most powerful piece on the chessboard. So pay attention to the queen. Anytime your opponent makes a queen move, pay attention, because that queen may be up to some mischief on the board. So pay attention to the queen. So I'll just move the queen around just to illustrate how the queen moves. So notice it move up, down, sideways, and also in diagonals. Okay, so I could just move in diagonals. So I could move sideways, up maybe 1 square, sideways many squares, and that is how the queen moves. Up, down, and sideways. Now, let's see the queen in action capturing pieces. So now we have some pawns on the board, and I will use the queen to capture some of those pawns. Actually, all the pawns. So let me just see what can I capture immediately. And yes, I have a pawn on the square before that I could capture. Okay, notice the square before, we spoke about the squares already. And the queen could capture the pawn on b4. So I will capture this pawn on b4 with my queen, and then I will move my queen. Well, actually, I'll capture this one, and then I will attack another one. So let me attack this one over here, capture it. I will be right in front of this one here, and also to capture. So in this way, I use my queen to capture all of the pawns that were on the board. So remember, the queen moves up, down, sideways, and in diagonals, just like a mixture of rook and bishop. The queen is worth 9 points, and the queen captures in the same way that the queen moves. Okay, so remember that. Take care of your queen as well. It's a very, very important piece. So let's see what will be the next piece that we have in store. Well, stay tuned. Okay, so we are back, and now it's time to talk about the king. The king in chess. The king is the most important piece on the chessboard. It may not be the most powerful one or the most skillful one, but is definitely the most important piece on the chessboard. Okay. If your king get trapped, meaning by checkmate, the game is over and you lose. Yes. The whole point of the chess game is to actually get this fella. If you checkmate your opponent's king, you win. And if your opponent checkmates your king, then you lose. But okay, let's talk about the king. The king is worth literally the whole game. We don't assign value to the king, okay? Because once the king is checkmated, the whole game is over. Okay, so I will not put a value to the king. I will not give it a value. Now, how does the king move? The king moves up, in diagonal, down, sideways. So the king moves like if it is a rook and a bishop, or just like the queen, but just one step at a time. Yes. Interesting. Eh? The king only moves one step at a time. So that means that it is a very slow piece compared to the other ones. So that is something you have to be paying attention to. If the other pieces are trying to hunt down your king cannot really outrun them. So make sure and protect your king during the game. So remember, the king move up, down, sideways, and in diagonals, but only one step at a time. So for example, if this king wants to reach to this square over here, then it will take me some moves. I cannot just reach there in one move like the bishop would do or the queen would do. No, it will take me more moves. So I have to make one move. My opponent will get to play a move. Then I make another move. My opponent plays. Let's imagine my opponent is playing some moves on the board, and it will take me not one move, but actually took me 1, 2, 3, 4 moves to reach from the middle of the board to the other side of the board. So pay attention to this. The king is a very slow moving piece. Now, let's see the king in action capturing pieces, because the king could capture pieces, okay? Now, he cannot be captured, by the way. No, you cannot capture a king. To win a game, you need to checkmate the king. You cannot actually capture the king. But that's something for another topic. Now, let's go with how the king captures. So here, it is white's turn to play, and the king gets to capture a rook. How nice. So now I'll use my king to capture the pieces that are on the board. So I'll move here, capture the rook, then I will move here, capture this pawn, and then I will use my king to hunt down that pawn and capturing it as well. So I'm going to go and capture that Okay, so this is how the king moves. This is how the king captures. Something to remember about the king, well, it's the most important piece on the board, and you have to make sure and take care of it. All right, so let's go now to the other pieces. We still have to learn about the pawns and about the knights. So I guess I left the more interesting ones for last. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so we have reached to the point where we have to learn about the pawns. Okay, pawns are the pieces with the least value on the chess board. Each pawn is worth 1 point. Okay, so for each pawn, 1 point. However, pawns are very important and they shouldn't be underestimated. Now, let's start talking about how pawns moves. Okay, so I want you to really pay attention to this one. So pawns could move 1 square from the starting line forward, okay, 1 square forward, or 2 squares forward. So let's say this is the starting line. From the starting line, they could move 1 or 2 squares forward. Um, Pawns generally just move 1 step at a time, straight forward. But from the starting line, only from the starting line, they get to move 2 squares forward. Only from the starting line. If the pawn has already left the starting line, will always only move 1 step forward. So that's first thing to pay attention to. Now, the other thing that we have to pay attention when we talk about pawns is that pawns capture in small diagonals. Okay, so this pawn could capture something that is here. This one could capture something that is here or here, and so on. So if I move this pawn here, this pawn is able to capture like this and like this. So this is the difference between pawns and other pieces. For example, with the rook moves forward and captures forward. The bishop moves in diagonal and capture in diagonals, and so the other pieces. However, the pawn, it moves forward, but it captures in small diagonals, as the diagram is illustrating it right here, okay? Like how it is illustrated on the board. So I will illustrate this with a capture. So if this pawn moves here, then this pawn could capture this pawn like this. However, if this pawn moves forward 2 squares, then this pawn cannot move forward and this pawn cannot capture this pawn neither. So both pawns are unable to move or capture each other. Okay, so if a pawn is in front of another pawn or in front of another piece, they cannot capture each other. So this is something that we have to pay attention to. All right. Now, let's talk about one more thing about pawns. So once a pawn reaches to the back rank, to the final rank, such pawn could turn into any of the pieces except for the king. So it could turn into a queen, knight, rook, or bishop. So if, let's say, I push this pawn here and you decide to give me your pawns so I could just capture them for free, and I manage to reach to the end, then I could turn my pawn into a queen. I will prefer to turn it into a queen, but I could choose among other pieces. So I could turn it into a bishop, a knight, a rook, not a king, and it cannot remain a pawn. It needs to be changed into something. So that is something for you to remember. Okay. So now I will just illustrate a little bit of pawn play. So push, let's say pawn here. And after this move, notice what is happening here. This pawn is challenging this one because pawns capture in a small diagonal. So then this pawn could capture this one, but then this one could also capture. And we got a fair trade, normal exchange of pawns. Okay, so this is how the pawn moves. Remember, at the beginning, the pawn could move 1 or 2 squares forward, okay, and that the pawns capture in small diagonals. Also, when the pawn reaches to the end of the board, it could turn into any one of your pieces. So that is something that you may want to remember as well. This one little thing more about pawns, but we're going to be learning that after. That is not critical for you to start playing the game. And it's a special move called embossment. Okay, but I'm going to be recording a video especially just to explain that point, but not now, later on. But now let's go with the last piece that we have to learn for today, and that is the knight. So let's go and learn about the knight. It is time to learn about the knight. The knight is the most complex piece on the chessboard. Is the only piece that could jump over other pieces. The other ones will need to make room. The knight could just jump over other pieces. And the knight doesn't follow straight lines. The knight plays in L shape. Okay, so that is something that makes the knight a very special piece, very good piece to create attacks and to trick our opponent. So let's look at the knight and how the knight moves. So first I will look at the black knight and let's see how the knight moves. In L shape, so we are going to do 1, 2, and then we make a turn. And literally, that is how the knight moves. 2 squares forward, then make a turn, or 2 squares to the side and then make a turn, or 2 squares down and then make a turn, or 2 squares to the other side and then make a turn. So I could say that this knight from here, it could go here, 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 and here. So this is how the knight moves. Notice one rule to pay attention to is that from a dark square, you will always jump into a light square. And if you are in a light square like this knight here, then you are going to jump into a dark square. So from light square to dark square, from dark square to light square. So that is something for you to remember when you are learning about the knight. Okay, so for this knight, this is squares. This is where this knight could go to. Notice it looks very nice. And for the white knight, then the knight could go to these squares over here. So this is the scope and the range where the knight could jump to. Now, let's see this in practice. Okay, so now I have this knight and my job is to capture those 3 pawns on the board. So immediately I notice that my knight could go 1, 2, 3 and capture that pawn, and my knight could also go 1, 2, 3 and capture this pawn from a dark square to a light square. However, my knight cannot go and capture this pawn. First of all, it's too far. Second, this knight is on a dark square and this pawn is on a dark square as well. So you have to go from dark square to light square. Cannot be from dark square to dark square. And the pawn is just too far. I could go 1, 2, but then I need to turn. And I come close to the pawn, but I cannot capture this pawn immediately. So let me start by capturing this one. Then I have to try to get this one. So I will come back to where I was and I will go and capture this one next. Then I have to find a way to capture this pawn. So what could be a good route to reach to capture this pawn? So I immediately imagine coming like this. Okay, well, look at it like 1, 2, and then 3. And then from here, I may want to go 1, 2, 3. And then from here, I could go, and then from here, I want to go 1, 2, 3. So I will actually take that route to capture that pawn. So I come here, then I will come 1, 2, 3, come here, and then I will go 1, 2, 3 and capture the pawn. So remember, with the knight, it's very important that you practice the movement of the knight. So at home, you could always grab a knight, put it on a chessboard, and practice moving the knight around. Also, practice visualizing. You look at the knight and then try to picture the squares where the knight could go to. So look at the board and look at the square where the knight could jump to. Okay, so you could even mark those squares with your eyes where the knight could jump to. So you will get, used to practicing with the knight. Okay, so this is it with the knight. Okay. Now, if you have any questions or any comments, you could always write them down in the video. Also, if you would like for me to record a video on a specific topic, let me know also in the comments. If you like this video, hit the like button, follow, and please share this video as well to as much people as possible so they could learn how to play this wonderful game. Okay, so I will see you soon for our next video, and until then, adios, bye bye.